They say a wedding is where two lives become one. But on a warm Saturday afternoon in the spring of 2019, inside the candlelit halls of St. Maron's Chapel in suburban Connecticut, a wedding became something else entirely. It became a confession. It became a courtroom. And before the sun went down, it became a crime scene. The vows were just seconds away from being finished. The groom's voice was trembling with joy. The guests were leaning forward, some already reaching for tissues. And then a scream pierced the chapel. The groom's mother didn't see a daughter-in-law standing at that altar. She saw the hit-and-run driver who left her paralyzed 10 years ago. In the space of 3 seconds, a woman's carefully hidden past shattered like glass across a marble floor, and an entire family's world changed forever. This is the story of what happened that day. What led to it. And what it cost everyone involved. Stay with me. Because the truth, when it finally came, was more devastating than anyone in that chapel could have prepared for. Before we go inside that chapel, I want you to sit with a few questions. Because this story isn't just about a wedding gone wrong. It's about the choices we make when we think no one is watching. It's about how far a person will go, how deep they'll bury a secret, to build a life they feel they deserve. Who was the woman standing at that altar? Was she a victim of her own fear, a young woman who made a terrible mistake and spent a decade running from it? Or was she something colder than that? Something more calculated? And what about the woman who stopped the ceremony? What does it take, what kind of certainty, what kind of pain, to stand up in a room full of people you love, and destroy the happiest moment of your son's life? Was she right to do it? And then there's the groom. A man who thought he knew everything about the woman he loved. A man who was about to discover that the foundation of his future was built on the bones of someone else's ruin. What really happened that night, 10 years before the wedding? Why did she make the choices she made? And is it ever possible, for a person to outrun who they truly are? By the end of this story, you will have your answers. But I warn you, not all of them will bring you comfort. To understand what happened inside St. Maron's Chapel on that April afternoon, we have to go back. All the way back. To two women whose lives were moving in completely opposite directions, until one night made them collide. The first is Margaret Okafor Ellis. By the spring of 2009, Margaret was 53 years old and at the peak of what she called her second bloom. Her children were grown. Her husband, rest his soul, had passed 4 years prior, a quiet man who loved jazz records and Sunday crosswords. She had grieved, and she had healed, and she had come out the other side of grief softer, somehow, and more alive. She had a son, Daniel, who was 26 and working his first real job at an architecture firm in Hartford. She had a garden she was proud of. She had friends who came for dinner on Friday nights. She laughed easily. She walked 2 miles every morning. Margaret was the kind of woman who made a room feel warmer just by being in it. She was also, on the night of March 14, 2009, driving home alone from her book club at 10:45 p.m. She would never walk those 2 miles again. The second woman's name, the name she was born with, was Veronica Ashworth. In 2009, Veronica was 24 years old and living the kind of life that looked perfect from the outside. She was beautiful in the way that made people assume things about her, that she was confident, that she was lucky, that everything came easily. And for a long time, she had let them assume. She'd grown up in a mid-sized Ohio town, the daughter of a contractor father who worked too much and a mother who drank too quietly for anyone outside the house to notice. She'd gotten out on a partial academic scholarship, reinvented herself at a small New England university, and by 2009 was finishing her master's degree in communications. She had a boyfriend she was losing interest in. A thesis she was behind on. A part-time job at a marketing firm where she was, quietly, quite brilliant. And she had a habit, one she'd never quite kicked from her college years, of driving when she was overwhelmed. Not drunk. Let's be precise about that. Not drunk. But distracted. And speeding. And on the night of March 14, 2009, deeply, wrenchingly upset about something she would never fully explain to anyone. Two women. One road. One moment that would chain them together for the next 10 years, even though they would never speak a single word to each other. Margaret remembers the light being green. She remembers the music on her radio, something slow and old. She remembers seeing the headlights. And then she remembers nothing until the hospital. The car that hit her never stopped. 10 years later. St. Mary's Chapel, Westfield, Connecticut. The flowers had cost $4,000. The dress had cost more. Daniel Ellis, now 36, broad-shouldered, with his father's quiet eyes, stood at the altar looking like a man who had finally, after a long time searching, found solid ground. And he had found her 2 years prior, at a fundraiser gala in the city. Her name, the name she gave him, the name on her driver's license, the name embroidered on the wedding program being passed down every pew, was Celeste Marlowe. She was, by every visible measure, the ideal partner. She ran a boutique PR firm. She knew the right things to say at every dinner party. She had charmed Daniel's colleagues, his friends, his cousins. And she had, in the 2 years they dated, carefully, methodically, never once given Daniel reason to look too closely at the years before they met. A name she had chosen herself. 8 years earlier. At the altar, the officiant, a warm-voiced man named Pastor Giles, was nearing the end of the ceremony. "Do you, Daniel James Ellis, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Daniel's voice was thick with emotion as he said, "I do." "And do you, Celeste and Marlowe, take this man?" And that is when it happened. Stop. The chapel went still. Margaret Okafor Ellis, silver-haired, elegant, seated in the front row in her wheelchair, was not looking at the officiant. She was not looking at her son. She was looking at the bride. Her face had gone the color of ash. Her hands, the same hands that had tended roses, that had raised a son alone, that had spent months learning to grip a wheelchair's wheels after the accident, those hands were gripping the armrests so tightly her knuckles had gone white. She had not planned this. She had not planned any of it. If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment with "I'm still here." Let's see who's truly following this shocking story. For 2 years, she had welcomed this woman into her home. Had cooked for her. Had shared stories. Had felt, quietly, gratefully, that her son had found someone worthy of him. But today, something had shifted. Something small, and devastating, and impossible to unsee. Margaret had seen that scar before. Not on this woman. Not on Celeste Marlowe. On the woman who had been behind the wheel of the car that struck her on March 14, 2009. She knew, because for 6 months after the accident, that scar was the only thing she'd had. The only physical description the single witness, a teenager walking a dog, had been able to give police. A young woman. Dark hair at the time. And a small curved scar on her left wrist. Like a crescent moon. That witness description had gone nowhere. The case had gone cold. And Margaret had spent 10 years learning to live inside that silence. Until now. That woman is not who she says she is. In the years after the accident, Margaret had done what survivors do. She had grieved what she lost. She had adapted. She had refused, stubbornly, magnificently, to let the wheelchair define her entire life. But she had never stopped wondering, she had never stopped replaying that night. The green light. The music on the radio. The headlights. And then the long, gray silence of a hospital ceiling. The doctors had been gentle but honest. Her spinal cord injury was incomplete, she retained some sensation, some limited movement, but she would not walk again. Not without assistance. Not the way she once had. Her 2-mile morning walks were over. The garden would need to be redesigned for a woman in a chair. Everything, had been restructured around a single moment she couldn't even fully remember. She had told Daniel some of it. Not all. She had never wanted her grief to become his burden. But she had kept that witness statement. Folded inside a book she kept by her bed. A small curved scar. Like a crescent moon. And now, standing at an altar in $4,000 of white silk, the woman formerly known as Veronica Ashworth had made a single unguarded gesture. A turn of the wrist as she reached for Daniel's hand. A flash of pale skin. A crescent moon. "I know who you are," she said. Her voice did not shake. "I know what you did. To understand what Veronica Ashworth became, you have to understand what she ran from. And how well she ran." On the night of March 14, 2009, after her car struck Margaret Okafor Ellis at a quiet intersection in Hartford, Veronica did not stop. She told herself, in the seconds after impact, that it might not have been serious. She told herself that again when she got home and sat shaking in her shower for 40 minutes. She told herself a version of it for weeks, that maybe Margaret had been okay, that maybe no one had seen, that maybe it would all dissolve into nothing if she just kept moving forward. And then she saw the headline. And she understood exactly what she had done. What followed was not remorse acted upon. It was remorse buried. Within 6 months of the accident, Veronica had quietly withdrawn from her master's program, citing personal circumstances. She had ended her relationship. She had packed 2 suitcases and moved to Atlanta. She had, with the cold precision of someone who had studied communications and understood better than most how identity is constructed and projected, begun the process of becoming someone else. Veronica Ashworth did not exist anymore. Celeste Marlowe was born in 2011, on paper, complete with a carefully curated backstory, references who had been coached, and a LinkedIn profile that began confidently in 2010 with a junior role at an Atlanta consultancy. She had changed her hair. Lightened it. Changed her mannerisms, her accent, slightly, just enough to sand down the Ohio edges. She had built, from nothing, a woman that no one would look at and think, fugitive. She was good at it. Extraordinarily good. By 2015, she had moved to New York, launched her PR firm, and was cultivating clients in finance, fashion, and philanthropy. She had a reputation for discretion. For managing difficult narratives. For knowing, instinctively, how to control what a story looked like from the outside. The irony of that was not lost on her. She thought about it, sometimes, late at night. She had built a career out of managing other people's hidden truths. While her own sat quietly, 10 years deep, waiting. Now. Here is where this story becomes not just tragic, but psychologically complex. Because I want to ask you something, and I want you to sit with it honestly. Did Celeste Marlowe love Daniel Ellis? By every account, from friends, from colleagues, from the handful of people who were close enough to see them in private moments, she did. Or something very close to it. She was not a sociopath running a calculated scheme. She was not targeting Daniel for his family's money or his name. She had met him by chance, been disarmed by him, and fallen, perhaps for the first time in her adult life, into something that felt genuinely real. And that is perhaps the most devastating part of this story. Because Daniel's love for her was real. And hers, complicated, contaminated, built on sand as it was, may have been real too. But she had made a choice, 10 years ago, that meant she could not build anything clean. She could not marry Daniel without carrying the secret into the marriage. She could not love Margaret, the woman whose garden she admired, whose stories she listened to, whose son she wanted to spend her life with, without knowing what she had taken from her. She had sat at Margaret's table. She had eaten her food. She had called her Margaret and meant it warmly. And she had said nothing. Whether that is cowardice, or cruelty, or simply the paralysis of a person trapped by a choice made in a single terrible moment, I will let you decide. But I will tell you this. The web she had woven was extraordinary in its precision. And like all extraordinary webs, it held perfectly. Until the light hit it just right. Until a woman at the front of a chapel caught a glimpse of a crescent-shaped scar. And remembered. If this story has your heart racing, if you're sitting on the edge of your seat wondering how this ends, drop the words, "I'm still watching," in the comments right now. I read every single one. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. Because what's coming in the next few minutes, what Daniel did, what happened in that chapel, and what the courts ultimately decided, changes everything. Don't go anywhere. In the chapel, time had gone strange. That is the only way to describe it. 200 people in their finest clothes, surrounded by flowers and candlelight and every material ingredient for joy, and the air had turned to ice. He looked at his mother. He looked at the woman he was about to marry. And in that moment, Daniel Ellis, a man known by everyone who loved him for his steadiness, his even temper, his refusal to be rash, felt the floor disappear beneath him. "Mom." His voice was careful. Deliberate. "Mom, what are you saying?" "I'm saying I know her," Margaret said. "Not as Celeste. I'm saying I've known her face for 10 years. I'm saying that scar." She pointed. Not dramatically. Quietly. As though she were pointing to something she had been looking for in a long, cluttered room and had finally found. "That scar is the last thing the witness described before the case went cold." Celeste did not run. She did not deny it. She stood very still, her bouquet of white ranunculus trembling in her hands, and looked at Margaret with an expression that guests would later struggle to describe. It was not guilt, exactly. It was not defiance. It was something more like relief. The horrifying, exhausted relief of a person who has been holding their breath for 10 years. "Daniel." Her voice, when she finally spoke, was very quiet. "I need you to know that I love you. I need you to know that first." Daniel stared at her. "Whatever you're about to tell me," he said slowly, "tell me it isn't true." She said nothing. And that was the answer. What followed was not screaming. Not the dramatic collapse of a soap opera. It was quieter than that. And quieter things, in my experience, are often the most devastating. Within minutes, because this is 2019 and information moves like water through cracks, someone in the pews had found a 10-year-old Hartford police report. An open case. A hit and run. A victim's name, Margaret Okafor Ellis. And a witness description of the driver. The best man, Daniel's oldest friend, Marcus, moved toward him. Put a hand on his shoulder. Said something quiet. Daniel did not respond. He was looking at Celeste. And Celeste was looking at Margaret. And Margaret was looking at her hands in her lap. The groom's side and the bride's side, the neat social geometry of a wedding, had dissolved. This was no longer a ceremony. This was a family being asked to choose. And it was asking Daniel, specifically, to do the impossible. To look at a woman he loved. To look at a mother he adored. And to decide, in real time, in front of everyone he had ever known, what he believed. What he valued. Who he was. We'll come back to Daniel. But first, let's talk about the moment the web finally came fully apart. They moved to the side vestibule. Someone, one of the coordinators, trying to maintain some professional dignity in an imploding situation, had suggested it. Keep it contained. Keep it off the main floor. It didn't work. Nothing was going to be contained now. But they went anyway. And in that small, white-walled room, with the sound of 200 confused guests on the other side of the door, Veronica Ashworth told the truth for the first time in 10 years. Not all of it. Not at once. But enough. She told them her real name. She told them about Ohio. About the scholarship. About the thesis she never finished. She told them about March 14, 2009. The rain. The intersection. The impact. She told them, and this is the part that would later feature heavily in the legal proceedings, that she had seen Margaret fall. That she had known, in that moment, that it was serious. And that she had driven away anyway. She told them she had thought about turning herself in. Many times. She described a specific evening, 3 months after the accident, sitting in her car outside a Hartford police station for 45 minutes before driving away. She told them that meeting Daniel had made it worse and better simultaneously, worse because every day with him was a day she was deceiving someone good, better because for the first time in years she had felt like a person again, not just a fugitive in beautiful clothes. Margaret listened to all of it. She did not interrupt. She did not cry. When Celeste finished, Margaret said 5 words. Just 5. You watched me fall. And left. Not a question. A statement. The plain, clean summary of 10 years of pain. Celeste said nothing. She looked at her hands. Daniel stood with his back against the wall and his eyes on the ceiling. And in the silence of that white room, the full weight of what had happened, not just that day, not just 10 years ago, but in all the days in between, settled over all of them. Here is the twist that no one in that chapel had anticipated. And I mean no one. Among the guests who had remained in the pews, because most of them had, frozen, unsure of what to do, was a woman named Patricia Vance. Patricia was Celeste's most senior employee. Her operations director. A woman who had worked for her for 6 years and who Celeste had trusted completely. Patricia had known the broad strokes of Celeste's past. Not everything. But enough. She had known about the name change. She had, over the years, helped quietly manage the digital trail, certain old records, certain search results, certain alumni directories that Celeste had asked her to clean up. What Patricia had not known, what she would claim under oath 6 months later, was the specific nature of what Celeste was hiding. She had assumed financial troubles. A bad relationship. Perhaps a minor legal issue. She had not known about the accident. She had not known about Margaret. And sitting in that pew, listening through the vestibule door to fragments of confession, Patricia Vance made a decision. She opened her phone. And called the police. Because whatever she had been willing to do to protect Celeste Marlowe, she was not willing to do it for Veronica Ashworth. The wedding had become a crime scene. Exactly as I told you it would. I want to pause here, because we've reached the emotional peak of this story. And I want to ask you something. If you had been Daniel Ellis, if you had been standing in that vestibule, listening to the woman you loved dissolve into someone you'd never met, what would you have felt? Rage? Grief? Pity? Would any part of you have understood? Hold on to your answer. Because what Daniel did next surprised even the people who thought they knew him best. When the officers arrived, Celeste, Veronica, did not resist. She had stopped resisting anything, by then. The woman who had managed crises professionally for 15 years stood in her wedding dress in a side vestibule and told the responding officers her real name. She said it clearly. Like she had been waiting to say it out loud for a very long time. She was not arrested in the chapel. The officers took her statement, confirmed the open case in Hartford, and asked her to come with them for questioning. She asked, one last time, to speak to Daniel. The officers allowed it. Briefly. Visual, a doorway. Celeste and Daniel, 2 feet apart. Her veil draped over her arm. I'm sorry, she said. I know that's not enough. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, and witnesses would quote this for months. I don't know who I'm supposed to be sorry for. You, my mother, or the person I thought you were. He walked back into the chapel. She walked out the front door. The wedding was over. In the weeks and months that followed, the legal machinery moved with the slow, grinding certainty that it always does. Veronica Ashworth, because that was the name on the court documents, was charged with felony hit and run, leaving the scene of an accident causing serious injury, and several related offenses connected to her fraudulent identity. Her attorney argued, not unconvincingly, that she had been a young woman in a moment of panic, that she had spent 10 years in psychological torment, and that the person who stood before the court was genuinely rehabilitated, functionally, professionally, by every behavioral measure a productive and lawful member of society. The judge was not unmoved by this argument. But the judge was not solely focused on who Veronica had become. He was focused on what Margaret Okafor Ellis had lost. Margaret's victim impact statement was not angry. Those who were present would remark on that for years afterward. She did not rage. She did not plead. She did not perform her suffering for the gallery. She simply described her life before March 14, 2009. And her life after it. The 2-mile morning walks. Gone. The garden. Redesigned for a woman who could no longer kneel in the soil. The way she had to relearn, at 53, how to navigate a world built for bodies that worked differently than hers now did. And then, quietly, with a composure that made the courtroom go very still, she said this. She said that the hardest part was not the wheelchair. The hardest part was the 10 years of not knowing. The 10 years of wondering if the person who had done this to her had felt anything at all. And she said that even now, knowing what she knew, she could not bring herself to wish Veronica Ashworth a ruined life. Because she had seen, in that vestibule at the chapel, what a ruined life looked like from the inside. And it had not looked like triumph. Veronica Ashworth was sentenced to 36 months of supervised probation, community service, mandatory counseling, and substantial financial restitution to Margaret Okafor Ellis. The judge declined to impose prison time, citing her cooperation, her record since the incident, and Margaret's own statement, which had not called for incarceration. It was not the ending some had wanted. It was not the fiery punishment that online audiences, who had seized on the story with the particular appetite the internet reserves for female villainy, felt was warranted. But it was, perhaps, closer to justice than many cases of this kind ever receive. Daniel Ellis did not speak publicly about any of it for a long time. When he finally gave a brief statement, through a friend, not to press, he said only that he was focused on his mother and on his own healing. He did not say whether he had forgiven Celeste. He did not say whether he hated her. He said he was learning, slowly, the difference between the two. Margaret returned to her garden. It looked different now. But it bloomed. So what do we take from this story? I've been sitting with it for a long time. And what keeps coming back to me is this. Veronica Ashworth's crime, the original crime, on that rainy March night, was a moment. A single, terrible moment of panic and selfishness. But what followed was a choice. Made every day. For 10 years. Every morning she woke up as Celeste Marlowe was a choice. Every dinner at Margaret's table was a choice. Every time she looked at the man she loved and said nothing, that was a choice. And the thing about choices, unlike moments, is that they compound. A moment of cowardice can be forgiven. 10 years of it becomes a different thing entirely. But here is the other side of that. Margaret Okafor Ellis, a woman who had every reason to calcify into bitterness, who had lost something irreplaceable, who had been wronged in one of the most intimate ways a person can be wronged, chose, instead, not to. Not because she was a saint. Not because she wasn't angry. But because she understood, with the particular wisdom of someone who has spent years living inside the consequences of another person's cowardice, that her wholeness could not depend on the other person's suffering. Not every loss is the end. Some are the beginning of something greater, a harder, quieter, more rooted kind of strength. That is Margaret's story. And it deserves to be told alongside the other one. The chapel is empty now. The flowers have been cleared away. The programs are in a recycling bin somewhere. But the people who passed through that place on that April afternoon, they carry it. All of them. And in different ways, for the rest of their lives, they will be shaped by what happened there. By the choices made in panic on a rainy night a decade ago. By the silence kept over 1,000 dinners. By the courage of one woman in a wheelchair who looked at the person who had shattered her world, and simply told the truth. Before you go, I want to sit with you for just a moment. Because this story raises questions that I don't think have easy answers. If you had been Daniel, could you have forgiven her? If you had been Margaret, would you have been able to do what she did in that courtroom? And if you had been Veronica, at what point do you think you would have told the truth? Day 1. Year 1. Or never. I read every comment on this channel. Every single one. So leave your answer below. Tell me what you would have done. And tell me this too, do you believe in second chances? Not the easy kind, the kind granted freely before the truth comes out. But the hard kind. The kind that comes after everything has burned down. I want to know what you think. Now. If this story held you, if you watched all the way to this moment, then I think I know what kind of storyteller you are. You're the kind who wants the full picture. The kind who isn't satisfied with easy villains and clean endings. The kind who wants to understand. And if that's you, subscribe to this channel. Because every story we tell here is built for exactly that person. Turn on notifications. And I will see you at the next story.